When I think of superstar Baylor wide receivers, guys like Kendall Wright, Terrence Williams, Tevin Reese, Corey Coleman, and Denzel Mims come to mind, and most of the best wide receivers in school history came once Art Briles was the head coach. There was one guy I failed to mention though. He was a borderline 5-star recruit coming out of high school, had 3 great years with the Baylor program, and went down as one of the best Bear wide receivers ever, but unfortunately he was never drafted and he never saw one snap in the NFL. In today's video, I want to talk about who this player is, his illustrious Baylor career, and what ultimately would go wrong for him. Right before we get into that, and we are now on the road to 100K, so if you are new here, please be sure to subscribe, as nearly 80% of you guys are not subscribed, and I would really appreciate it. Now, let's get started. At this point, you're probably wondering who the heck am I talking about, and his name is KD Cannon. But in order to understand what went wrong for him, we need to go back in time and see how Cannon became a big-time player to begin with. Going back in time, KD Cannon loved football and he grew up in East Texas. He grew up in the town of Mount Pleasant, which was 14 miles away from another Baylor football legend. Kendall Wright was a huge name in the area and eventually decided to take his talents to Baylor, where he became a star alongside Robert Griffin III and Terrence Williams, and ended up spending some time in the NFL. When KD was coming up, they compared him to Wright, and Cannon would make a name for himself back in 2011, when as a sophomore he'd catch 61 passes for 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns, and really put his name on the scene in the Texas recruiting realm. He'd have a sensational junior campaign where he'd have over 100 catches, 1,597 yards, and 25 touchdowns, and he was an all-state player, and offers from big-time programs around the country really started to pour in. He had another spectacular senior season, but it really seemed he was going to go to the Big 12 or stay in the state of Texas. Art Briles and Kendall Briles really recruited Cannon hard, and eventually would get a commitment from him after their spring game in 2013. Cannon said, quote, "From my junior year going into my senior year, that's when my name really started to get out there. I considered Oklahoma, Texas Tech, and Texas A&M. I thought about it a lot. At A&M, I didn't feel like I was at home, and at Baylor, I did feel like I was at home. They told me I can come in as a freshman and get playing time, and maybe even start. That means a lot, plus they were like a family, and that really won me over." He said Art Briles had a different mindset than any other coach he had ever seen, and he wanted to play for the Baylor Bears. He was also a huge name on the recruiting scene, as not only was he a track star, but he was rated as a 5-star recruit, the number 4 wide receiver, and the 30th best player in the class of 2014. Other guys such as Speedy Noyle, Erman Lane, and Malachi Dupree were ranked ahead of him. And when you go back in time, this 2014 class was not very good at the wide receiver spot, especially the top guys. He'd have a lot of hype going into Baylor, and with a couple of injuries, he would get that opportunity to play right away. He had a 46-yard touchdown in their 45-0 win over SMU, and then the following game, he would break school records. He had 223 yards in a 70-6 win over Northwestern State, and this was the second most in school history, and his 3 touchdowns was now a school record. Also, keep in mind, he put up all those numbers in the first half. Because of that, he was immediately named to the Biletnikoff watch list and was one of the top wide receiver threats in the country. Baylor quarterback Bryce Petty had this to say, quote, "I've honestly never seen anybody like him. He's got an extra year that not a lot of people have had. You've heard all the stories about him coming in, but once you get a chance to see him play, it's crazy. He's got a whole other game speed, which is kind of ridiculous." Cannon also offered his input on it, as he said, quote, "I really wasn't expecting to play this early. It's been great working with Bryce because he's going to be the Heisman Trophy winner this year, and both him and Seth Russell have been in this program for a while, and they know the ins and outs, and working with them is going to get you better each and every day." Cannon obviously had a huge start to his 2014 campaign, and in the following 2 weeks, he'd have 6 catches for 189 yards and a touchdown against Buffalo, and then 9 catches for 48 yards in a win over Iowa State. He wasn't much of a factor in their games against Texas, West Virginia, and Oklahoma, but he'd have a solid game in November against Texas Tech, as he'd have 6 catches for 39 yards. As a freshman, he'd play in 13 games, catching 58 passes for 1,030 yards and 8 touchdowns. Because of his performance, he was named a freshman All-American by multiple sources and had one of the best seasons for any young wide receiver in Baylor history. The future was incredibly bright for Cannon, but now he would have some competition in 2015, as Corey Coleman would be back and better than ever. In 2015, Corey Coleman would win the Biletnikoff Award, as he would catch 74 passes for 1,363 yards and 20 touchdowns, and Cannon would kind of become a second option. He would have a huge game in their opener against SMU where he would go for over 100 yards, but after that, he was always the sidekick. He had a big game against Kansas State before, in one of the biggest moments of the season, he would shine. On the road against number 6 Oklahoma State, Baylor would upset the Cowboys, and a big reason for that was because Cannon went for a career-high 210 yards and 2 touchdowns in that game. From there, he'd put up average numbers for the rest of the season, and Baylor would get selected to play in the Russell Athletic Bowl against number 10 North Carolina. For his sophomore year, Cannon finished with 50 catches for 868 yards and 6 touchdowns. It definitely wasn't a bad year, and when your teammate wins the Biletnikoff, I'd say he did pretty good. But the expectations were now going to be on him for the 2016 season. You can definitely say he lived up to the hype, as he caught a career-high 10 passes in a win over SMU, went for 213 yards and 2 touchdowns in a win against Rice, and was always a consistent factor in that offense. After a 6-0 start where the Bears got as high as number 11 in the country, they would absolutely blow it, as they would lose their next 6 games and would finish the year at 6-6. Because of that, they would go to the Cactus Bowl where they would beat Boise State and finish with a 7-6 record, and this was very disappointing considering their start. Cannon had multiple occasions where he had great games. He caught 7 passes for 122 yards and 2 touchdowns. Against Texas Tech, he got a career-high 12 passes for 132 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then against Boise State, he had his final moment as he caught 14 passes for 226 yards and 2 touchdowns, and this was an incredible season. He'd finished the year with 87 receptions for 1,215 yards and 13 touchdowns. Cannon was named a first-team All-Big 12 selection because of this, and he decided to declare for the 2016 NFL Draft. And he would decide to declare for the 2017 NFL Draft. He's one of the top wide receivers in school history in both receptions, single-season yards, single-season touchdowns, and single-game touchdowns. And for the most part, a lot of people forget about him just because of how good Corey Coleman was. Many expected, with Cannon's production, his speed, and his talent, that he would be drafted, but somehow there were 33 guys taken and his name was not called. This was a huge blow to KD Cannon, but he would sign the biggest deal of any undrafted free agent, as he would sign with the 49ers. Unfortunately, when it came to final cuts, they would sign another guy by the name of BJ Johnson instead, and Cannon would now have to find another team. He signed with the New York Jets, but was later waived, then signed with the Rams, but was later waived, and he signed twice with the Dallas Cowboys, but never played and was eventually waived. After trying to make 4 different teams and not making the cut, he decided to go up north to Canada, where he would try out for the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and he would be there for a year. He was taken by the Los Angeles Wildcats in the 2020 XFL Draft, but was waived during final roster cuts. He then finally had one more opportunity in professional football, where he'd be signed by the Seattle Dragons in the XFL, but then his contract was terminated when the league would die on April 10th of 2020. So yeah, KD Cannon never saw one snap in the NFL, barely ever played in both Canada or the XFL, and as of right now, it doesn't look like professional football is in the cards for him. I tried to do a deep dive into what he is up to now, but I cannot seem to find anything. In terms of why I don't think he made it in the NFL, I'm kind of clueless. He had the speed, he had the production, he had all the talent in the world, and it seems like he had a great work ethic, so I don't understand why he never got a shot. The NFL is a business at the end of the day though, and maybe they just didn't see enough in him to give him an actual opportunity. What I do know though is he is a legend in the Texas high school football scene, had a spectacular career at Baylor, and will go down in the history books for that program. If you have any information or a theory on why KD never really got a chance in the NFL, be sure to let me know your theory down in the comment section, as I definitely would like to know. Before you go, be sure to hit that like button if you enjoyed today's video, subscribe if you are new, let me know what player I should take a look at next, and be sure to check out all my other videos on the end screen. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.